All right. Welcome to the Harris County Flood Control District's virtual community engagement meeting to discuss the watershed planning study for Lower Greens Bayou. This virtual community meeting is being offered by the Flood Control District to share vital information with the community. My name is Robert Fricke with the Flood Control District Communications team. I am joined tonight by a team of Flood Control District leadership and subject matter experts to ensure we continue to keep you up to date on these important flood mitigation projects in your community. We are also joined by staff from area elected officials, offices, and community associations. We are glad to see the community so engaged in these projects. We look forward to continuing to share updates and keeping you all in the community involved. Next, I'd like to share remarks from Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner Adrian Garcia.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. I'm Adrian Garcia, Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner. Thank you to the Flood Control District for hosting this event. And before we begin, I want to send a sincere thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I know that we are all still working through the impacts of the pandemic, and my hope is that you and your families continue to be safe. If you haven't already, please consider getting vaccinated. If you are hesitant, I completely understand. But I encourage you to speak to your doctor or medical expert to help answer any of your questions or concerns, and hopefully that will lead you to getting your vaccine. My office is hosting ongoing vaccination events throughout our precinct. If you're looking for a place to get vaccinated, be sure to call my office or follow the Harris County Precinct 2 social media pages. My team is updating those on a daily basis. Now let me transition to what brings us here this evening. We're here to talk to you about a flood control project that will help your community. As a part of my new Revive to Thrive initiative, this flood prevention effort will help protect the community and make a major step toward ensuring there are fair and equitable opportunities for communities throughout Precinct 2. Our goal is to focus on revitalization rather than gentrification by empowering communities and creating opportunities for our existing neighborhoods to be more resilient, inclusive, and thriving. With the right investments, resources, infrastructure, commitment, and community involvement, we can all progress and thrive. Harris County works best when all communities are thriving. I'm proud to be from Precinct 2, and I want everyone to know this community is a great place to live, work, and play. This is one of the many flood mitigation projects happening within Precinct 2, aimed at improving our drainage systems to help minimize the impact of major rain events, keeping you, your family, your property, and our communities safe. We know that residents in this community experience flooding during major rain events, including Tropical Storm Allison and, of course, record levels during Hurricane Harvey. This project is intended to help prevent a repeat of those events. Quality infrastructure is not my only responsibility as County Commissioner, but also one of my top priorities. This is why I've tasked my team with taking action and demonstrating real progress to address our community's needs, things that make a difference and make us better prepared to weather the next storm. I hope you will continue to stay engaged in this process. It's important to remember that your voice, your experiences, and your opinions do matter. Again, we're thankful that you've joined us tonight. Please continue to be safe, and if you haven't already gotten your vaccine, please consider doing so. Have a great night.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. We appreciate you joining us tonight for this meeting. This virtual public meeting will begin with a presentation to share project updates, including an overview of the watershed planning study for Lower Greens Bayou, the mitigation concepts studied, and next steps. The presentation will be followed by a virtual question and answer session with Flood Control District team members. Attendees will be able to submit comments and questions through the website or by phone. Any comments not addressed during the Q&A session will receive a response from the Flood Control District after the close of the comment period. Instructions on how to participate in the virtual meeting are included on this slide, on this virtual meeting webpage, and on the Flood Control District website. I will also share a reminder of these instructions when we reach the Q&A portion of the meeting. We will now transition to Burton Johnson, the feasibility study manager for this effort, who will share information about the flood control district and this project. Burton, over to you.
Thank you, Robert, and a special thanks to each of you for joining us on this nice evening. In this presentation, we will give a brief overview of this project, but before we get to the project specifics, we want to share some information about the Flood Control District. The Harris County Flood Control District is a special purpose district created by the Texas legislature in 1937 in response to devastating floods that hit the Houston area in 1929 and again in 1935. The Flood Control District is governed by the Harris County Commissioners Court and works closely with other entities in our region, such as the Harris County Engineering Department and the City of Houston. The organization was created in part to serve as a local partner to leverage federal funding for flood damage reduction projects. Our mission has expanded since our founding, leading to billions of dollars in federal, state, and locally funded infrastructure projects in the ground. The mission of the Harris County Flood Control District is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. One of the most difficult challenges we face is constructing effective projects that are sensitive to the community and natural values in a highly urbanized area. Harris County includes 23 main watersheds totaling approximately 1,800 square miles with more than 2,500 miles of channel, roughly equivalent to the distance from New York to California. A watershed is a geographical region of land that drains to a common channel or outlet. Each watershed in Harris County has its own unique characteristics and needs. The project we are presenting tonight is in the Greens Bayou watershed, located in northeast Harris County. Our area is naturally flood prone. Here are some of the reasons why. First, we are subject to extreme rainfall, often from tropical storms and hurricanes. Second, our landscape, as we all know, is very flat. And third, our native soils are heavy in clay, which impairs and limits their ability to soak up excess rainfall. While the Flood Control District plays a critical role in flood risk reduction, we are one of several entities involved in these efforts throughout our region. When rain falls on your roof, it flows through several jurisdictions, including streets and drains managed by the Harris County Engineering Department, a municipal utility district, or a city, such as the City of Houston, before it flows into a larger creek, channel, or bayou that the Flood Control District owns and maintains. This slide illustrates the various jurisdictions, which sometimes we even share with other entities. Inside neighborhoods, as shown on the left side of the illustration, storm sewers and roadside ditches collect stormwater runoff and start the process of moving it away from streets and homes. Storm sewers and roadside ditches are the responsibility of the underlying municipality or Harris County in unincorporated areas. The larger bayous and channels that take the collected stormwater and move it through our drainage system to Galveston Bay are the responsibility of the Flood Control District. This is shown on the right side of the illustration. In the middle is a stormwater detention basin, sometimes constructed and maintained by the Flood Control District and sometimes by others. When storm sewers on the left are increased in size, this creates an increase in runoff. And since it is our policy to avoid any adverse impacts from our projects, detention basins help to safely take in and temporarily store excess stormwater during heavy rain events and then meter outflows at pre-improvement rates. Often, we partner with Harris County precincts, utility district, and others to add recreational amenities such as trails to these basins and along our channels. When we have flooding, it may be caused by the stream or bayou exceeding its banks, or it may be that the neighborhood drainage system is overwhelmed. The Flood Control District is interested in both of these, but our primary focus is on reducing flooding along the streams and bayous. On August 25, 2018, Harris County voters approved $2.5 billion in bonds for flood risk reduction projects. This vote followed a series of meetings across Harris County in each watershed, which resulted in a list of what is now 181 bond projects. As of August 25, 2021, every project included in the 2018 bond program has been initiated, including 11 projects in the Greens Bayou watershed. A total of more than $1.35 billion in partnership funding has been secured so far to stretch the 2018 bond program even further. The actual timing of each individual project will depend on a variety of factors, including environmental permitting, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocation, and in some cases, requirements of a particular grant. That said, project lists and projected schedules are updated regularly on our website. While the bond was for $2.5 billion, the full cost of every project in the bond tables is almost $5 billion. So we made it clear from the outset that we would need funding partners to fully construct the projects in the bond program. And as I mentioned, we've had some success so far, having secured more than $1.35 billion in partner funds. And as this graphic illustrates, the many sources of the partnerships, including federal, state, and local funding that Flood Control District is working to secure for Harris County. Each agency has its own definition of eligible projects and its own requirements for local match funding. So the Flood Control District works diligently to match projects to the right partnership opportunities. Okay, now that I've provided that background, I will now move to the part of the program that is specific about the Greens Bayou watershed and the watershed planning study for Lower Greens Bayou. Here, we have a map of the entire Greens Bayou watershed. As I mentioned earlier, a watershed is defined as all of the area that contribute drainage to the main channel, which in this case is Greens Bayou. The upper reaches of Greens Bayou flow in an eastward direction, and then the lower reach flows south into the Houston Ship Channel. The watershed covers about 212 square miles, and there are about 308 miles of open streams, including the primary streams and tributary channels. Flooding of homes and businesses along Greens Bayou and its tributaries has occurred numerous times in the last 30 years, with devastating flood levels throughout the watershed brought on by Tropical Storm Allison in 2001 and Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Significant floodplains and high-density development have combined to cause high damages during even moderate flood events. This area was largely developed before our current understanding of flood mapping, meaning many structures were built within the current 100-year floodplain. Additionally, the lower 10 miles of the watershed, which is generally the portion downstream of US 90, are tidally influenced, which means that water levels are also influenced by the elevation of water in the ship channel. As such, storm surges can impact flooding levels in this portion of our study area. While every flood damage reduction project is unique, they all have a common life cycle, which is shown here. Each project begins and ends with common and predictable milestones along the way. Whether a project moves forward from one stage to the next and how quickly depends on many factors, including the availability of funding, shifting community priorities, and other changing circumstances from year to year. As you can see in the project life cycle graphic, we are in the feasibility stage of this project. During this stage, our engineers and consultants conduct an in-depth evaluation, identify and quantify problems, develop and explore possible flood reduction alternatives, and ultimately make recommendations. For the feasibility study, the final product is a report that summarizes the study and forwards recommendations around concepts that may need to move forward for additional consideration and refinement. But we understand that many are not all that excited at the completion of just a study or report. However, this element is critical. There are limited dollars for flood risk reduction, and we want to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. We want to ensure that we build the right projects and that we maximize the use of dollars spent. And we want to ensure that projects do not cause flooding somewhere else. Additionally, the securing of flooding assistance from others requires rigorous demonstration of project benefits and evaluation of environmental impacts. The feasibility study also informs the next steps, including the preliminary engineering process that will further refine the alternatives, including identify needed rights of way, determine utility relocations, environmental permitting, and refined and detailed cost estimates. Here is a list of key considerations that guide our feasibility study. And y'all can read these. I'm going to highlight just 3 or 4 of them. First and foremost, we are looking to recommend future plans. projects and initiatives to reduce flood risk to identify problem areas in the Lower Greens Bayou watershed. It's simply why we are here. But as we do so, there are some other things we look to do as well. One very important aspect, we are trying to identify and pursue opportunities to provide equitable flood risk reduction solutions, particularly to support vulnerable communities. We are engaging the community and seeking input from the community stakeholders to ensure that the plans, in keeping with our mission, reflect community values. And as I've already mentioned, we must avoid increasing flood risk in other parts of the watershed. We do not want to address flooding in one neighborhood with a plan that just aggravates flooding in another neighborhood. You may have heard us talk about our flood mitigation toolbox. These are the various techniques we typically deploy to reduce flooding. It is important to find the right type and right configuration for each project. Now I'll walk through them briefly to add some additional context. First, channel modifications have long been used by the Flood Control District and other entities to reduce the risk of flooding. And it's a broad category, from full rectification of a channel to providing some modification to the side slopes. Stormwater detention, which I described earlier, is also a popular mitigation tool. The concept is simple: temporarily store floodwater to provide relief to the channels downstream. Stormwater detention is more cost-effective when the watershed is smaller. As the watershed gets larger, more and more storage volume is required to obtain the same benefit. And that is why you will not typically see a stormwater detention basin, say, along a large river, such as the San Jacinto River. It is common to pair channel modifications in a reach with stormwater detention basins to mitigate increased flow. Less common tools include channel diversions and bridge adjustments. Diversions are only available when there is a location that you can divert the floodwater to that will not cause adverse impacts. Bridge adjustments and or replacements can remove an impediment to flow, and they are also often implemented as part of a larger suite of initiatives. But a bridge replacement can also result in additional flow downstream, requiring it to be paired with the stormwater detention basin. Last is acquisition or buyouts in the floodplain, which is simply purchasing flood-prone properties and assisting the owners in relocating to a home on higher ground. It is not always the most popular option, but it is sometimes the best option, especially when there are safety hazards to residents and first responders. Before I go any further, I want to take a moment to describe the overall project study area, which is shown on this map. There is a large stormwater detention basin, known as the Lower Greens Bayou Stormwater Detention Basin, located just north of Tidwell Road. There is no technical definition of Lower Greens Bayou. However, for this project, it is a portion of the Greens Bayou watershed downstream of this site. The study area includes the contributing watershed of Greens Bayou. Downstream of this point, there are a number of tributary channels that also drain to the bayou, and there are flooding issues along some of these channels as well. In total, the Lower Greens Bayou feasibility study area encompasses just over 42 square miles. This map shows a few things. It shows our computed areas of inundation for a 10-year and 500-year storm events in the area. It also includes yellow ovals, or actually red ovals, that depict 9 areas of concentrated flood risk based on clusters of flooded structures as reported to the Flood Control District and other entities and as verified by our modeling. These clusters help drive our formulation of potential flood mitigation concepts. And while we use this data as a baseline, we refine these areas in collaboration with the community to help us organize our approach. Based on these areas of focus I just highlighted, you can see some overlap with locations of the flood risk mitigation concepts we explored during the study. All in all, we looked at 11 concepts in 10 locations to determine what projects or types of projects may be the most beneficial and feasible in the Lower Greens area. I'll talk more about the specific concepts we explored shortly. While studying these flood risk mitigation concepts, we had to have an objective way to weigh the identified concepts against all other projects in Harris County. As projects are identified, they compete for funding, whether that's through local dollars or partnership dollars. And without an apples and apples comparison of key factors, it's difficult for us to make determinations about where to allocate funds and prioritize efforts. So we use that same score criteria described earlier in our study. We score each mitigation concept on the 8 factors listed here. This then rolls up into a final score for each of them, which we use to better understand the potential project. I want to emphasize a couple of important aspects of this score. First, it's important to note that these scores are not the end-all, be-all of this effort and are not the sole determinator for what comes out of this study. They are, however, an important element of decision-making, but not the only element. And when it comes to these concepts moving forward for additional study, or the project cycle we showed previously, there are other things that are put into consideration. Second, the metric was not used explicitly to evaluate the projects in our study area against each other, but we do want to recommend projects that compete well for funding, so it was a strong consideration. And now that you have much of the overall context, let's dive into the mitigation concepts themselves. We showed this map a moment ago, but as a reminder, these are the locations of the mitigation concepts we're discussing tonight. And as we show each of the concepts, we'll be walking down the bayou, so to speak. That is to say, we'll be covering these concepts north to south within the watershed. I'm going to provide a general description of each of them. I'm also going to tell you what we like about each particular concept, and I'll call these the positives. And I'll also share maybe what we don't like about each, and I'll call these the challenges. The first mitigation concept we'll discuss tonight involves additional stormwater storage in the existing flood control district stormwater detention basin known as the Lower Greens Bayou Stormwater Detention Basin, or some know it by its unit number, which is P500-01-00. This concept is located at the northern edge of our Lower Greens Bayou for this effort. You can see that the general location via the map on the lower right-hand side of the screen. This basin was constructed in the late 1980s by constructing a dam across the channel and a berm around much of the perimeter. It occupies considerable land, but has never been excavated. So, for this concept, we investigated the potential of excavating the land and, if necessary, modifying the control structure. And from a pure engineering standpoint, this concept does provide the potential to reduce flood levels downstream. A very aggressive excavation could reduce downstream 500-year flood levels by about 1 foot. However, these reductions would dissipate as you move further down the stream. But the challenge is huge. We learned a lot about this stormwater detention basin and the land. There are identified concerns related to cultural resources, and there are some older stands of trees that are unique to our area. Further, there are extensive wetlands throughout the site. These concerns are what led the flood control district to avoid excavation over 30 years ago, and the hurdles are even higher today. We estimate the excavation costs for the alternative we looked at to be about over $300 million. There would also be a high cost associated with environmental mitigation, and there is some question as to whether we could even get the project permitted at all. In summary, the positive is that it is an opportunity to provide meaningful reduction in flood flows along Greens Bayou downstream of Tidwell. The challenge, it has an immense cost, and there are questions regarding the ability to construct the project here. The second mitigation concept is along a tributary channel that we call P122-00-00, which is near C.E. King Middle School, as well as the Sierra Ranch, Stonefield Terrace, and Parkway Forest subdivisions. The channel runs from east to west with a portion adjacent to Crenshaw Boulevard. For this concept, we looked at enlarging the channel and constructing a stormwater detention basin. The positives of this project are that it benefits local neighborhood drainage, which is impaired in this area. It would reduce the floodplain to the north between the channel and Tidwell Road. Further, when this channel floods, it spills into the Humont subdivision to the south, and that would also be mitigated. The project would work in concert with subdivision drainage improvement projects that the Harris County Engineering Department's Recovery and Resiliency Group are working on in the Sierra Park and Stonefield Terrace subdivisions. So the positive is that we can address flooding in multiple neighborhoods and we can leverage work being done by Harris County. The challenges include limited right-of-way along the channel. We would either have to acquire land or construct an underground conduit to avoid displacements. We estimate this project with the channel conveyance improvements would cost almost $24 million. If we replace a channel and enlarge it with a conduit, the cost would be a little bit higher. Our third mitigation concept focuses on Brock Park, which is a large and mostly undeveloped park owned by the city of Houston. It sits at the confluence of Halls Bayou and Greens Bayou and includes an out-of-service golf course, forested areas, and a nature preserve. On the surface, it provides a great opportunity for detention. That said, stormwater detention in the lower reaches of a large watershed can be incredibly challenging. As I discussed earlier, due to the larger flow rate, we have to provide substantially more detention volume to provide the same reduction in flood risk when compared to areas further upstream. And there's another large hurdle. Brock Park is owned by the city of Houston and a City of Houston park. Any projects we eventually construct on this site would have to align with the city's vision for the property and the park itself, and would be the subject to the requirements of Texas Parks and Wildlife, Chapter 26. All of that said, this mitigation concept is a bit different than others we'll discuss tonight, in that we know we may have about $10 million from the flood control bond to work with for this effort. With that in mind, we explored a concept that would fully utilize that $10 million in potential funding and maximize the potential volume. Our analysis suggests that a substantially larger project would require, Our analysis suggests that a substantially larger project would be required to make meaningful flood reductions along Greens Bayou, and that would be very difficult given the current function and limitations of Brock Park. Our next mitigation concept considers channel P107-00-00, which drains south from Beaumont Highway near the Sam Houston Tollway and then southeast towards Greens Bayou. This channel is also known as Big Gulch Bayou. We have identified capacity concerns in the main channel in the areas just downstream of Beaumont Highway. This area of interest includes Royalwood Elementary School, as well as the Royalwood and Beaumont Place subdivisions. This concept considered adding capacity to the channel by constructing a box culvert system below the channel and constructing a stormwater detention basin to ensure flow rates are not increased downstream. On the positive, this would help the local drainage in the area, which is a concern, and address most of the inundation of homes. Further, it requires only limited right-of-way acquisition. The challenge is there is limited depth for constructing the stormwater detention basin, which means we would get less storage volume for each acre of land that we have to purchase. We estimate this project to cost $8 million. The next concept considers improvements to Greens Bayou near Old US 90 or Beaumont Highway. This area is near the McCarty Road landfill, includes the Nelson Estates and Ralston Acres subdivision. The mitigation concept considers adjustments to both the railroad bridge and the highway bridge, along with the construction of a stormwater detention basin. And the positives of this mitigation concept are that we could reduce flood levels without a major right-of-way acquisition or displacements of homes or businesses, although we would have to acquire land for the stormwater detention basin. The challenge with this concept is that the reductions are minimal and that the number of structures benefited is very small as well. Further, we estimate this mitigation concept to cost almost $48 million. The sixth mitigation concept is along Greens Bayou in the vicinity of Highway 90. This concept would benefit the Wynwood Gardens area. We were originally interested in this area because there is quite a bit of out-of-bank flooding in this portion of Greens Bayou, and we saw an opportunity to construct a high-flow diversion through undeveloped land. The project would also require construction of a detention basin. And while yes, it would be rather straightforward to construct, the benefit was less than we hoped, and it really did not provide positive benefits to areas with homes that flood. In fact, the opportunity was that there is vacant land. Unfortunately, the challenge is that it really only benefited areas where there's mostly vacant land. And as we studied it further, the flow restriction that we were trying to address was smaller than we first thought. For these reasons, we stopped studying this one completely and dropped it from further consideration. We did not even compute a cost, nor did we apply the metric. The next mitigation concept looks at Greens Bayou near Wood Forest Boulevard. This is a well-known identified area of interest, and the flood risk reduction area of interest includes Robinson Elementary School, as well as the Wood Forest and Riviera East subdivisions. For this initial concept, we are proposing some minor channel conveyance improvements along Greens Bayou, coupled with minor bridge modifications and construction of a stormwater detention basin. Okay, so what do I mean by minor? This is probably easiest described by explaining what it is not. It is not a massive enlargement of Greens Bayou, nor the construction of a large ditch. Instead, it involves some channel widening and excavation in the overbank areas, something we call benching. The work is above the ordinary high water and would increase the flood carrying capacity. Admittedly, this is less effective than major channel conveyance improvements. However, the minor channel improvements have less environmental impact and can be an aesthetic enhancement. The bridge modifications are necessary to accommodate the wider channel from the conveyance improvements, and the stormwater detention basin is necessary to ensure that we do not cause adverse impacts downstream. The positive of this concept is that no homes or businesses are displaced, and it's not overly expensive. The challenge of this concept is that, frankly, it does not provide that much flood risk reduction. We could get more flood risk reduction by increasing the size of the channel widening. However, we would begin to impact the adjacent neighborhoods, and of course, the cost would go up. We would also need additional stormwater detention, and there's not land readily available for that. We estimate that this concept would cost almost $7 million. As we looked at the area near Wood Forest Boulevard, we also decided to explore a sediment removal concept. During our studies of Greens Bayou itself, the area right here near Wood Forest Boulevard popped up as an area of deposition, or an area where we saw an increase in sediment. And while this is a normal occurrence in a natural channel like Greens Bayou, we wanted to give a fair consideration to a potential sediment removal project in this area to see what it might take and how expensive it might be. We found some minor benefits associated with this project. In fact, a reduction of 500-year flood elevations of about 1/2 foot that would remove the area of inundation for the 500-year flood for 12 structures in the area. And we came up with a per mile cost for the effort, which comes to about $11 million per mile, or $21 million for the total effort. The positive is that we can get some flood reductions, but there's some challenges, and one challenge is the cost. $21 million is a lot to address flooding of a smaller number of homes. Additionally, since we are in a tidal area, the sediment removal would require dredging, and the handling of the dredged material would be difficult. There are numerous environmental permitting challenges regarding dredging and material disposal, and these can add some expense and time. We are also concerned about the long-term viability. Because Greens Bayou flows directly into the Houston Ship Channel, the lower reaches of the watershed are subject to tidal influences. These influences slow water down and increase the sedimentation, and that's not something that's going to go away, and suggests that this would be an ongoing maintenance initiative more than a capital improvement. The Flood Control District is moving forward with a FEMA-funded project to remove sediment from Greens Bayou and tributary channels in the non-tidal portions that are upstream of the study area. This will benefit Lower Greens Bayou by reducing the sediment load within our study area and reducing the future deposition of material. And last, the Flood Control District has never done a dredge project. Recall the toolbox we shared earlier. Dredging was not on that. That doesn't mean this concept is off the table necessarily, but it does mean some additional consideration and evaluation would be necessary before taking this big step. The next mitigation concept looks at flooding along Greens Bayou just upstream of I-10. Neighborhoods here include home-owned estates, North Shore, and Greens Bayou Park subdivisions. This is an area of well-known historic flooding, some of it quite severe and deep. The Flood Control District has acquired the property that once housed the East Houston Medical Center. The main reason for purchasing the hospital site was that it was the most cost-effective way to prevent the hospital from flooding, especially with concerns regarding access in and out of the hospital during an event. But now that we own the land, we are hopeful that we can find a way to use it to further reduce flood risk. So we look to see if we can address flood risk along Greens Bayou by constructing a stormwater detention basin on the former hospital's land. The clear positive of this is that the Flood Control District already owns the land, so the cost and displacements are not an issue. Challenge is, unfortunately, that the stormwater detention basin will only address a small area and will only have marginal benefit to flooding. It is not nearly large enough considering its location within the watershed. We estimate that this project would cost $2.6 million. The second to last concept we'll discuss tonight is along channel P103-00-00, which is also known as Goodyear Creek, which is a tributary channel that joins Greens Bayou just downstream of I-10. The area of interest includes Cimarron Elementary School and the home-owned estates in North Shore subdivisions. And as with the earlier concept, this mitigation concept considers the former East Houston Medical Center property. The concept proposes the replacement of many culvert crossings along Goodyear Creek and the construction of a stormwater detention basin on the old medical center's property. The positive of this concept is that it reduces flooding along the channel, and it provides a more beneficial use of the flood control district property acquired from the East Houston Medical Center. Additionally, it does not cost as much as most of the other concepts we have evaluated. The challenge is that while it addresses flooding from Goodyear Creek, most of the homes in this area are subject to inundation from the Greens Bayou main channel. It would likely improve drainage during the more common smaller storm events, but not make much of an impact on larger flood events. We estimate that this mitigation concept would cost about $2.9 million. And finally, the last concept we'll discuss here tonight is downstream of I-10 near Market Street. The areas of potential benefit include the Greens Bayou Park and Woodland Acre subdivisions, as well as the Brown Shipbuilding Industrial Park. The concept proposes adjustments of the bridge at Market Street and construction of a stormwater detention basin. And really, it's not an adjustment of the bridge at Market Street. The more we study it, we realize it was a replacement of the bridge at Market Street. But it would have benefited the areas around here, including these low-lying neighborhoods upstream of I-10. The challenge is the high cost of replacing such a large bridge. We estimate the cost of this project to be about $38 million. Further, it would require extensive coordination with the city of Houston, who owns the bridge, and we would have to address the management of traffic during construction. All right, take a deep breath here. Now that we've walked through all 11 mitigation concepts, we wanted to give you an at a glance of the conversations we just had. Each of the concepts are shown here, along with their benefits, the anticipated cost, and the final score using the metric I described earlier. It's again important for me to reiterate that these scores are not the end-all be-all for these mitigation concepts, and just because a project ranks lower does not mean it will not move forward for further analysis. But scores are used to compare projects across the county as projects compete for funding. So we do desire to forward projects that will compete well. So before I wrap up, I wanted to return to the project life cycle. As I mentioned earlier, we are in the early days for all of these concepts. Each of them will need to be weighed against other concepts across the county. And within this study, we wouldn't have any concepts to weigh. Without this study, we wouldn't have any concepts to weigh into those conversations. So this is a critical first step in moving projects forward in the area. And I will now turn the program back over to Robert to kick off our question and answer.
Thanks, Burton. Before we move into Q&A, I want to share a quick reminder that we'd love to hear from you on this and other projects moving forward across Harris County. To learn more about this project, ask questions, and sign up for our mailing list, please visit hcfcd.org/lowergreens. As a reminder, there are 3 ways to submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. Submit a comment on this site in the box near the presentation live stream. Submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/lowergreens, or submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801, utilizing meeting code 9629. If you are joining us via phone tonight, please press star to leave a message. Additionally, I want to reiterate that any questions not addressed during tonight's Q&A will receive a response from the Flood Control District following the close of the comment period. Information from this meeting and a recording of the live stream will be available on the Flood Control District's website and YouTube channel. Joining Burton for our Q&A session tonight is Dina Green, Planning Division Manager at the Flood Control District. Now it's time to take some of your questions. Oh, and I also would like to share a quick message. Many of the questions we are receiving this evening are very location specific, which may require us to do some additional research and follow up with you after the meeting. So please note, if you do not hear your specific question addressed tonight, we will follow up with you shortly after the meeting. And with that, the first question of tonight is for Dina. Why does this area flood?
Okay, thanks, Robert. So sure, we've got a map up here to remind you a little bit more about the area that we're looking at. And again, it's the lower end of Greens Bayou. And so when Burton touched on that earlier today, we talked a little bit about the overall size of the Greens Bayou watershed, which I believe was about 42 square miles. So if you can imagine, we've got a very large drainage area upstream of this lower end, and there's a lot of water that's being collected and making its way down Greens Bayou as it passes through this area into the Houston Ship Channel. So we've got actually a few sources of flooding. One is when we get these really large flood events in Harris County, and we're getting a large volume of water that's being created and making its way downstream. Well, we can see large, broad floodplains sometimes being generated along Greens Bayou. And so, of course, when that happens and we've got development in those areas, that can be a contributor to flooding. We also have a unique condition in this watershed where that lower portion of Greens Bayou, that part that we talked about, the lower 10 miles below US 90, that is tidally influenced. So again, when we see some of these large storm events come in and they're raising the tides, we can see the ship channel's elevations backing up along lower Greens Bayou and influencing flooding along the channel as well. And then, of course, you can have flooding occasionally due to some of the limited capacity in those storm sewer and roadside ditches running through various neighborhoods.
Thank you, Dina. This next question is for Burton. What are the benefits of this project?
So, one of the things that I think we may have confused a little bit in the presentation is we've kind of used the word study and project interchangeably. And I guess technically within our own vernacular or how we talk about it, the study is a project. But when you talk about the project life cycle we showed previously, really we're looking at a suite of projects. So the 11 mitigation concepts that we showed earlier, each of them can kind of grow up and become their own project. And so each of those mitigation concepts we presented have their own unique and local benefits and their own unique and local cost. So each of these attempted to reduce flood risk either along the main channel or along some tributary channel. And just to kind of highlight that a bit, some of those projects on the lateral channels were quite effective at addressing flood risk. When we get to the main channel of Greens Bayou, it's a huge challenge. There's a lot of water, as Dina said, a lot of water coming down there, and finding a way to manage all that water and coming up with what you would call major reductions in flood risk is frankly quite difficult to do. And we have yet to identify a plan that just totally erases flooding. So each of these main stem projects I talked about provide slight benefits, but none of them really change the larger character of flood risk.
All right, thank you, Burton. The next question is for Dina. Will the old Texaco golf course be used in any of these alternatives?
Okay, sure. Yes, the old Texaco golf course is a large green area out here. And actually, during the course of this study, we, the flood control team, did have quite a bit of coordination with the Houston Parks Board, who owns that property now. And I believe they're calling it the Cool Green Park. Excuse me. While we didn't identify that as one of the sites that we've described tonight, Flood Control District has had quite a bit of coordination with the Parks Board about what their future plans are for Cool Green Park. And I know that they do have interest in working with us, both from a perspective of trying to improve water quality benefits, but also taking a look to see if there's ways that that property could be used to help provide some better drainage or stormwater management for the surrounding areas near Cool Green Park. And we don't have all of that finalized today, but I know that that is something that Houston Parks Board are interested in, and we've had conversations with them about it.
Thank you, Dina. And of course, this is a live session, so we do have comments coming in as the meeting progresses. We have this comment from Joseph Bergstrom, and I believe this is for you, Burden. Please install boat ramps where possible during the construction of these future improvements. See the launches at Tony Marin Park for ideas.
Okay, thanks for the suggestion. I think a lot of people like boat ramps and canoe launches and the sort, and I'm one of those people too. What we do is we build projects and we manage our infrastructure is we look for opportunities to partner with others. The Flood Control District is a special purpose agency that the state has assigned certain responsibilities and certain roles. And when we ask the taxpayers to pay a flood control tax as part of their tax bill, that money has to go to reducing flood risk. It can't go to other things. So we partner with others to put those types of amenities in, and we've been quite successful with it. So we continue to look for those, and those things happen more often in concert with actual implementation of projects. So I appreciate the comment. It's something we try to do, and I would thank you for that suggestion.
Great. Thank you, Burden. We have another comment that came through. I believe this one is for you, Dina. Denise Alexander commented that she would like to know what the Harris County Flood Control District plans to do about the flooding in the Parkway Forest subdivision. Our subdivision made national news during Hurricane Harvey.
Sure. So while the Flood Control District, we don't have a specific project located in your subdivision, but I would like to note that the Harris County Engineering Department does. So they've got a group out of Harris County Engineering called Recovery and Resiliency Department, and they've been working on various subdivision drainage improvement projects around the county, and that includes one in the Parkway Forest subdivision. Our latest update on that is that they have completed the design for the project, which means they should be moving forward with construction in their near future. I don't have an estimated timeframe for the construction of the project, but we are keeping updates for those on our website, and you can find that at www.hcfcd.org. And there will be links to click on the Greens Bayou watershed, and you can get an update on our projects as well as information about that there.
And I can add quickly to that. The second concept we looked at is along what I said, channel P122, which is ultimately that subdivision. Parkway Forest drains through P122 into Greens Bayou. So we've coordinated quite a bit with Harris County on their project, and as it pertains to that potential mitigation concept. And so they're doing their project that will have a benefit in that neighborhood. And I think that benefit would be even larger if we're able to leverage their project with a project that we build along P122.
Excellent. Dina, Burden, thank you both. This next question is for you, Burden. Melanie asked, is buying properties along the bayou a part of this plan? It seems that every property that has been sold in my area, in that area, is being turned into truck yards.
Buying properties for the purpose of removing flood-prone homes from the floodplain is not a specific part of this plan, but it is part of a larger program that the Harris County Flood Control District has throughout the county. And you may be familiar with the Flood Control District's buyout program. I may mention to that in our flood control toolbox. And that is where people, kind of raise their hand and say, I'd like to be considered. And what the Flood Control District does is looks for grant and opportunities from FEMA and others, and has been quite successful over the years in buying lots of properties, including some in the Greens Bayou watershed. However, There is no such thing as part of this project. We are looking at structural improvements to address flooding. We have no real say in what real estate transactions between private properties and what ultimate land use becomes. I think that's out of our purview, and some of the things that frustrate residents may sometimes also frustrate us too.
Thank you, Burden. The next question is for Dina. Charles asked for clarification on what does the term homes removed mean?
Okay. So probably the real technical term or description there actually would be floodplain or inundation removed from the homes. But a lot of times, folks will get speaking, and it's very common for people to say, oh, the home is removed from flooding. But what we really mean is the flooding removed from the home, some type of measure being put in place to help reduce the risk so that that home is no longer seeing the flooding that we would have expected it to have in the past. Sorry if that caused some confusion.
Thank you, Dina. This next question is for you, Burden. Carl asks if any coordination with TxDOT will take place to address flooding on the feeder roads of I-10.
Well, I will answer this two ways. I think there's kind of a yes and no answer here. We coordinate with TxDOT all the time on their projects, and they're also looking for ways to address their infrastructure. But there is no specific coordination as it pertains to the feeder roads. As part of this project, we are looking at, that's part of the flooding that occurs for, when Green's Bayou floods, that's an area that floods. There may be some drainage issues when I talked about those two types of flooding that are really TxDOT issues. So if they want to address their drainage system, we're more than happy to talk to them about how to do that and help them do it. But financially and everything else, that is a part of their infrastructure that they're responsible for. If it's Green's Bayou itself that's causing the inundation, then we're interested in trying to find a solution there. And we looked at a few things in the vicinity of I-10 that I described that would hope to address that.
Thank you, Burden. And this next question is also for you. Landis Howard asked, how long before the project start of concept number 7?
Okay, so, well, let me answer this in a kind of a generic way. None of our projects that are presented before here have funding to move them to the next step in the project life cycle. So where we are right now is we've started the process of trying to move those projects forward, but they haven't moved yet. And completing this study is kind of the green light for those things to happen but they have to happen on their own merit. So if we're looking at mitigation concept 7 that we presented actually 2 versions of it. The first version was one where we do some minor work, and I don't believe that that's going to compete well. The second version is the one that a lot of people have become more interested in. And as I said, that's a new thing for the district to try to figure out, how to do a dredge project. How do you deal with the material? Because that stuff comes out wet. You can't just put it in trucks. You got to set it somewhere. Where are you going to set it? It's not going to smell good. You have to have land to do it. You probably can't put it in the floodplain. Those are all challenges. And if you haul it down on a barge down into the ship channel, you now have to get into all the environmental issues associated with the dredge disposal that the ship channel does and the port does. So there are issues that have to be worked out, and they're not small. So we have to move it forward in the project life cycle to even start to answer that question. And I think I just leave it at that. There are some issues to deal with before we can even do that. So it's uncertain.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that too, on what you touched on earlier in the presentation. We did do an assessment of the channel, and brought somebody on board called a fluvial geomorphologist to help us look at the overall condition and stability of the channel. And they did have, favorable feedback for us on Lower Greens Bayou. And we're seeing that the channel behaving in a way you would expect them to see. So some of those areas where you see some silt eroding out, but other areas where it being depositive is a normal function of a channel system. And, and there are times you can go in and do maintenance projects on it. I know just upstream of this one, we have quite a few maintenance projects where we'll be going in and doing some of that silt removal. However, on a project like Lower Greens, if we look in doing one of these dredge projects, it's, we're talking to you tonight about what a significant project that would be. It's not really going to be, a one and done project. Something like that in a channel system where you'd expect to be seeing a lot of silt come through, that channel is going to want to go ahead and be depositing that silt again and build back up to what it would consider to be an equilibrium point. So that's something that would be a consistent struggle to be addressing in the future. And so that's something that does need to be considered.
All right, thank you, Dina. This next question is for you, Dina. From Broderick Butler, if the ship channel affects flooding, can Harris County install locks like the Panama Canal to retain those specific flood causes?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And, that's not something that we looked at here. We typically at the flood control district do look for more of those passive types of flood mitigation measures. So those things that don't need to be actively activated during a storm event, that we know that they're functioning on their own and will be in place without having to have somebody go out and do actual human interaction and operation on them during those storm events. And one thing to be aware of as well is while that lock system can be used to try to help prevent flow coming up from the ship channel, we also have to be very concerned about not restricting flow that's coming down Greens Bayou as well. So both of those dynamics would come into play in that situation.
All right, thank you, Dina. Looks like the next question is also for you. How long will it take to construct this project?
Excuse me, the allergies are getting me tonight. So the projects that we've identified tonight, one of them was included in the 2018 bond program, that project at Brock Park, which again, we discussed will need quite a bit more coordination with the city of Houston before we understand really if that's a feasible project. The others that we've identified tonight, those would be projects that we will have documented and recommendations for further evaluation, and that we'll be considering these as we build a future capital improvement program. So we don't have specific funding set aside for these projects tonight, but this will be important information for us as we start looking for the future and developing that capital improvement program and understanding what types of projects we need across the county and the funding that's required for those.
All right, thank you, Dina. Before moving on to the next question, I would also like to state that we are extending tonight's meeting by 5 minutes to try and accommodate the questions that are coming in. Moving on to the next question. This is for Burton. Will any roads be closed during construction? What about loud noises from construction during all hours of the day? Will that be an issue?
Will it be an issue? Well, I think that depends on what's an issue for each individual, but look, construction is always an interruption that we're not always crazy about, but my county commissioner puts a sign up saying that it's progress. We're pretty sensitive on how we build projects to try to mitigate and be respectful of the neighborhoods. So depending on what the project is, obviously we're not going to be making loud noises in the middle of the night. We try to do things during, hours that are fair. We try to communicate with the neighborhood, let everybody know what's up, how it's working, take suggestions. We're very careful about the ingress and egress of equipment. One of the big issues, if we're excavating a lot of dirt, not quite often we are, is the truck routes and things like that. So those are all things that we try to work through with the community. But construction is not invisible and it's not silent always. So it can be a challenge. I think we do a good job working with our neighbors on that. We get complaints sometimes, but not that many, quite frankly.
All right, thank you, Burden. This next question is also for you. Mr. Woods asks, what are the next steps?
That's a great question. We kind of queued up the answer so far, but I don't think we've answered it very explicitly. I'll start with, again, though, the project life cycle, but I'll be more specific here. We are wrapping up our study. So everybody's excited about a study, right? I mean, I'm kind of being facetious there, but our study will wrap up and we will be done with that in the next few weeks. And at that time, we will look at all of these concepts and some of them, not all of them, but some of them and most of them will be kind of, I might want to use the word nominated here as opposed to saying recommendation. And once they are, they begin to be looked at as the flood control district looks at future capital improvement projects and identifies and secures funding. They look at projects that have been developed from plans just like this and studies just like this to see where the priorities are across the county. So that's why it's important to us to find projects that compete well so that they have a better chance to get funding. And that's exactly what will happen. Some of the things that we hope to do is to find funding partners. A project always is more interesting if it has a funding partnership where we can leverage our own funds. So as we complete the study, we will start to look for funding partnerships and look for opportunities to take some of these projects and move them forward in that project life cycle and move things towards preliminary engineering and towards design and ultimately towards construction.
All right, thank you, Burden. Denise Alexander asked several questions specific to Parkway Forest. Looks like we will follow up with her directly after the meeting. There is a funded bond project upcoming for construction in that area. Moving on, we do have a general comment for Dina to address. Roger has asked several very location-specific questions, with some questions pertaining to areas outside of this project.
Yes, so Mr. Butler, we can follow up with you more specifically on those. We will reach out to you. I believe we have your contact information, but if you could also put that in the chat as you've submitted your questions, we'll go ahead and reach out to you separately outside of this meeting so we can learn more about those areas that you had questions about and make sure that we have information to answer your questions.
Okay. And with that, I would like to share one final reminder that we are continuing to accept comments and feedback on this project through April 20th, 2022. We also encourage everyone to get flood insurance as flood season in Harris County runs year-round. Thank you again for joining us this evening and for your engagement with this project. We look forward to continuing to share updates as our work moves forward.